This video demonstrates how to apply protection and licensing to a Linux desktop application. There's two parts of software required: Quick License and Quick License RT Linux. You'll start by installing both of these applications onto either a Mac or Windows computer. Part of the process will be done on that Mac or Windows development computer to define the license and generate a ticket file, and then you'll copy that to your Linux machine and complete the process there. First, let's take a look at the Quick License. It consists of several applications and support files, PDFs, and such. The main Quick License application is what's launched on your Mac or Windows computer, and from there you can define the type of license you want and then output a platform neutral ticket file that could be used with Mac, Windows, or Linux. By type of license, you can create time-limited trial licenses, a product license that's perpetual, once activated runs forever, a try-buy license, or a subscription license. You can also set up the type of activation process used. It could be an offline activation process where on first launch the user receives a code from you that activates your specific application to their specific computer, or it could be an online serial number activation process where during the purchase process the customer receives a serial number they can later use to activate your software without your assistance. Another approach is a USB dongle that serves as a licensing key for the software, so it only runs if the dongle is present. The details of setting up the type of license you want and generating the ticket file won't be covered in this video, since there are other videos that cover that step-by-step process. Now let's look at the Quick License RT Linux folder that's been installed on either a Mac or Windows machine. There's several different folders of files, and based on how you want the process to work, you'll choose one of those folders of files to copy to your Linux machine. For example, if you have a 32-bit desktop Linux application, you're going to use this folder of files. And this will allow you to insert a few lines of code into your Linux application to call the Quick License API and bind it to that ticket file that defines the license. If you have a 64-bit desktop application and want to use the API approach, you'll use this folder of files. Finally, the Linux wrap application is used for a 64-bit desktop application, and it allows you to apply the licensing to the application without any programming at all, by just launching an application, filling in some information, and clicking a build button. The Hello application is used to demonstrate the Linux wrap process. It's simply a little application that when launched presents a window with Hello World in it. And you'll see a bit later how we can wrap that into a licensed application with the Linux wrapping tool. Finally, the user guide explains each of these approaches and how you would use that on your Linux machine. We want to protect a 64-bit Linux desktop application with the API approach, so we've copied the 64-bit Linux folder of files over to our Linux machine. You can see we have our Quick License runtime file and the associated folders that go with it. We also have the ticket file that was configured in Quick License on our Mac or Windows computer. That defines our license. And finally, for this test, we're going to be using the SendMessage application along with its support folders. Before we can use these two applications, we have to set the execute checkbox, so we can right-click and present the properties dialog, And then on permissions, make sure that execute checkbox is set. And we'll do that for both the quick license runtime file, which gets distributed with your Linux desktop application along with its support files, and also on this testing machine for the send message application. And what send message is going to be used for, it's going to emulate our application for the purpose of testing, so that without writing any code, we can enter a text command and send it to the runtime, see the response, and then within the real application, you would then continue to run normally or quit. To emulate our application, we're using the send message application. We've entered a request message into the request message field, and when we click the write button, it writes that to a control file, and then when we click the run button, it actually runs the application. For this example, we're using a manual activation process where the activation screen presents a request number. It's like the fingerprint of that machine. The user gives that number to you, and within Quick License, you can click a button and generate the needed activation code. When the user enters the activation code, clicks Activate Now, the license is activated, and based on the response, your application can continue to run or quit. Let's take a look at what actually happened behind the scenes. When Quick License runtime is used for the first time, it creates a folder, and the actual location of that folder is on the computer. In the var folder, it creates a ticket folder, and it then, when we click this write button, we're writing this command string to a control file in this folder, and then when we run the runtime, it will actually copy the referenced ticket file from its current location into this folder, and this becomes your active ticket file. It then determines that that ticket has not been activated, presents the activation screen, and then when the user enters the activation code, activates the ticket. So on each launch of the application, we're going to be sending this command string to the runtime, and it's going to validate the license using this active ticket file. The user guide describes how you can apply a few lines of code to your Linux application to bind it to a ticket file that defines the license. And then on first launch, it'll present some type of activation screen to activate the application, and then validate the application each launch thereafter. And you can apply any type of license based on the type of ticket file that you supply with your application. We're going to step back now and look at a different approach using Linux Wrap, where we can actually protect our application without any programming. So for this example, we're going to be using several ticket files that we've defined in our documents folder. We have our product license file, a trial license, a subscription license, and another license, which is a product license that activates with an online serial number activation process. We're going to use a source and an output folder by the Linux Wrap tool. In our source folder, we have the actual application that we want to wrap. Now let's take a look at that first. We've just copied the Hello application over from our installation that we did on a Mac or Windows computer, and we set the execute checkbox. Let's go ahead and launch this application so we can see what it does. It simply presents a window with the word Hello World in it. And so this is going to be our unprotected application, and we'll soon see how that can be wrapped into a licensed application. At the end of the wrapping process, our output will be stored in this output folder. And now let's look at the Linux Wrap folder. when we copy this Linux wrap folder from our Mac or Windows installation folder over to our Linux machine, we have to set the execute checkbox on 3 different files so that it's ready for use. So we're going to set the execute checkbox on the Linux wrap application itself, on the run app application within that folder, and finally the Quick License RT application within that folder. So now our environment is ready so we can launch the Linux app or the Linux wrap application. The Linux wrap application presents a record of information that's used to wrap one or more licenses around your application and put it into the output folder whenever you click the build button. So let's just go ahead and click the build button now and start this wrapping process. It'll take a moment or so. We see that in this record we've given a name to the record, and then we have a path to the source folder, a path to our executable in the source folder, a path to the output folder. We've selected that we want a single license to be applied, and here's a path to the ticket file that defines our license. The version number and the security code come from the main Quick License window when we set up this license. And now we see our build process has completed. Before we take a look at that finished application, we can see there's a record selector at the top of Linux wrap in which you can select and then define different records to apply different licenses to the same application or to wrap different applications. In our output folder, we see a Hello World folder, and that contains a folder of library files and our main licensed executable. When we run that, it presents an activation screen. The user will give the request number to you, and from Quick License, you'll generate the needed activation code, which the user will enter and click Activate Now. Once activated, the Hello application will start running. So we're back in the Linux wrap application, and this time we're going to apply a license to our application with an online serial number activation process. So we just click the build button to start building that application, and again we have a path to our source folder, the executable in our source folder, our output folder. We're applying a single license, but in this case we've selected a ticket file where we've set up an online serial number activation process along with the version number and security code, and we see our license has now been built. When the user launches the application, they're going to be presented with an activation screen that now will collect a serial number. The user types in the serial number they received during the purchase process. Now when the user clicks the Activate button, that serial number and other information about the license is sent up to an activation server, and once activated, the application starts running. In this last example, we're using Linux wrap to apply both a time-limited trial license as well as a product license to our application. We'll click the Build button to wrap both of these license types to our application, and on first launch you'll see how it's presented to the user as a try-buy dialog where they can try the product for a while, and then when they're ready they can buy it and activate it permanently. Now when we launch our licensed application, we're going to be presented with a try-buy license dialog. The user can click the try button and that will auto-activate the trial license and start the time-limited trial license, where the user is going to be able to use the application for a period of time. Each time they launch the application, they're going to get this try buy dialog, and until they reach a point where they can click the buy button if they're ready to purchase, and they'll purchase a serial number and then click activate to permanently activate the license, and then from then on they won't see the try buy license anymore. To summarize, we can apply a license to a Linux desktop application with a few programming commands that call the quick license runtime, or with the Linux wrap tool that applies a license to your application without programming. We started by installing the quick license and quick license RT Linux on a Mac or Windows computer, and from there we were able to define the license and generate a ticket file. We then copied that along with the appropriate files over to our Linux machine and completed the process. You can create manual activation type licenses or online activation licenses using an associated activation server like an account on the Safe Activation Service or a self-hosted activation server. You can also create dongle-based licensing with the Make Dongle tool. You can also automate the entire process of sales and distribution of a serial number by linking your Safe Activation account to a free PayPal or Stripe account or other ways of processing the credit card and then having the serial number automatically delivered to the customer.